Can secularists account for a moral worldview? Some scholars doubt that it's possible. I was perusing the New York Times and came across a very interesting article by Stanley Fish. Fish writes in the realm of religion, and New York, to the credit of the New York Times, gives him pretty much carte blanche to deal with anything he wants to deal with. There's a very interesting article in the New York Times in which he deals with various ways secularists try to account for a moral marketplace, for a moral worldview, and especially in the area of the political realm, because, of course, politics requires a certain amount of power and authority to tell people what to do. The laws are passed and so forth, and the question is, how does one account for those laws? And a lot of people don't want religion at all involved in this because religion is too authoritarian. So he describes the way various traditions understand the role of religion in public life. And he begins by pointing out that under classical liberalism, now classical liberalism isn't modern-day political liberalism. Classical liberalism is more in the realm of libertarianism. A lot of it has to do with a definition probably given more by Jefferson, those in the Rockwellian and the Austrian view of economics and property rights, that view of classical liberalism. So he points out that policy decisions should be made on the basis of secular reasons, that because they do not reflect the commitments or agendas of any religion, morality, or ideology, can be accepted as reasons by all citizens no matter what their individual beliefs and affiliations. And so essentially the classical liberal says what we need to do is to come up with some sort of consensus, reasonable understanding of what constitutes right and wrong, and base our political decisions on that. And of course, this is, as we'll see, is pretty much impossible. And the reasoning goes something like this. It's okay to argue that a proposed piece of legislation will benefit the economy or improve the nation's health or strengthen national security, but it's not okay to argue that a proposed piece of legislation should be passed because it comports with a verse from the book of Genesis or corresponds to the will of God. So what then is the basis for law? What constitutes all citizens? If all citizens are going to agree on this, all citizens don't agree on anything. We've had a political election where we have basically a 50-50 split in this nation, and even within each 50-50 split, there are disagreements of what should be proposed. There is no way that all citizens are ever going to agree on anything. Ultimately, where does morality find its justification? It's jurisdictional legitimacy. What gives the right, for example, of civil magistrate to do anything regarding politics and law? Every person approaches an ethical norm with a prior commitment. There's no neutrality here. And this is, I think, one of the biggest flaws of the classical liberals and libertarians in general, that this idea that somehow that we come to the table with neutral reason and with some sort of neutral way of evaluating moral rights and wrongs. Everybody has a prior commitment, some fundamental interpretive principle that they're using. No one is commitmentless. No one approaches anything in a neutral way. There is no agreed upon definition of reason or what's even reasonable. Even the Enlightenment skeptics acknowledge that reason is incompetent to answer any fundamental question about God, morality, or the meaning of life. And so here you have the new atheists today who are proposing that we know that God doesn't exist because reason has told us so. What is the basis of that assumption? Where does the reason-only advocate come up with a concept that reason is in fact the basis of everything? It's in essence begging the question. It's a circular argument. One has to presuppose reason before that they can use reason to determine whether or not reason is reasonable. And Fish offers what he believes as a more severe version of the argument. So he goes on from the classical liberal approach to something even more severe than it. On the other hand, you are not supposed even to have religious thoughts when reflecting on the wisdom or folly of a piece of policy. Not only should you act secularly when you enter the public sphere, you should also think in a secular way. And so a more severe definition of this would be to say, don't even think about religion. What you have to do is dichotomize in your own brain. If you want to be in religion, you use one part of your brain to deal with religion, and you can go and do that. But if you're going to get into the public arena, you need to leave religion out. So if a person believes that abortion is wrong because God has created us in His image, and killing a human being in any stage of life is an affront to His character, then just to have these thoughts disqualifies that person from entering the debate. So if the religious side of the brain creeps over into the secular side of the brain, that person is immediately cut off from any discussion. They are no longer allowed into the public square. They are no longer allowed at the debate table. Of course, such a position would disqualify those who signed the Declaration of Independence, because the signers believed that God is the judge of the world, to use the language of the Declaration, and the Creator who endowed us with life, again using the language of the Declaration. So what is the basis for morality given material-only assumptions about reality? This approach is a dead end. R.C. Sproul writes that God's existence is the chief element in constructing any worldview. To deny this chief premise is to set one's sails for the island of nihilism. This is the darkest continent of the darkened mind, the ultimate paradise of the fool. Now, a third, somewhat less stringent version of the argument permits religious reasons to be voiced in context of public decision-making so long as they have a secular counterpart. Thus, citing the prohibition against stealing in the Ten Commandments is all right because there is a secular version of the prohibition rooted in the law of property rights rather than in a biblical command. So this one says simply this. Look, yes, Christians, religious people can enter the marketplace of ideas, the public square, with their ideas as long as there is a secular counterpart to it. Well, within that secular counterpart, you could come up with anything. I could come up with a secular counterpart that says that homosexuality is wrong. In fact, I could probably argue from an evolutionary, materialistic, naturalistic worldview that homosexuality is wrong and should be outlawed. I could do the same thing with abortion. I could do the same thing with high taxes. So you could go into the purely secular realm and make that case. And so if you have a Christian or religious counterpart to that, then that becomes legitimate. So we're back to the very first fundamental premise is that everybody brings to the table certain prior commitments, and they're never going to let that fly. So, and again, what is the source of these secular counterparts? Where is the law of property rights found? Political systems like communism don't recognize a law of property rights. Even classical liberals, many of whom are atheists, can't account for the ultimate legitimacy for property rights. Theirs is more utilitarian. The more honest secularists are coming to realize that their reason-only, matter-oriented worldview cannot account for what they claim is natural and reasonable. Stephen Smith attempts to offer a solution in his book, The Disenchantment of Secular Discourse. It is not, Smith tells us, that secular reasons can't do the job of identifying ultimate meanings and values. We need religion to do. It's worse. Secular reasons can't do its own self-assigned job of describing the world in ways that allow us to move forward in our projects without importing but not acknowledging the very perspectives it pushes away in disdain. Simply, he's saying the secularists can't account for this world, and the very things that they need to make their world work, they can't really put forth because people will reject them because they have a religious connotation. So Smith's solution is by smuggling in notions that are formally inadmissible and hence that cannot be openly acknowledged or averted to. He says what we've got to do in order to make this work is to find something within a Christian worldview to do that. He doesn't use Christian in this case. Fish's conclusion is fitting. Insofar as modern liberal discourse rests on a distinction between reasons that emerge in the course of disinterested observation, secular reasons, and reasons that flow from a prior metaphysical commitment, it hasn't got a leg to stand on. Arthur Leff said something similar in his article, Unspeakable Ethics, Unnatural Law. All I can say is this: it looks as if we are all we have, As things now stand, everything is up for grabs. There is in the world such a thing as evil. Altogether now, says who? God help us.
For more related to today's topic, check out Basic Training for Defending the Faith, a 5-part video lecture series featuring Dr. Greg Bahnsen. You will find it at AmericanVision.com.